Every major transformation starts with structures, new frameworks, new processes, new tools. But as many leaders have discovered, success doesn't come from frameworks alone. The real breakthrough happens when you focus on the people, empowering them, tapping into their latent potential, and creating the conditions for innovation to thrive. That's when agility moves from being a project to becoming part of the culture. That's exactly the journey my guest today, Rob Westwood, has experienced firsthand across industries and continents. Rob began his career in mining, where he saw how technology and culture intersected across diverse environments. He then moved into banking, leading transformations in Australia, Canada, and the US, including at TD Bank with 7,500 employees, and at Barclays, where he helped leaders move from doing agile to being agile. What sets Rob apart is his passion for the people side of change. He's seen how flattened structures, design thinking, and OKRs can unlock potential, spark innovation, and create shared understanding. Whether it's coaching leaders, helping teams embrace new roles, or designing creative ways to bring people together, Rob's work proves that the heart of transformation is empowering people.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for that. Yeah, let's start by kicking it off with me introducing. You know, I'm a technologist at heart, always have been in the industry a little bit more than your 24 years. I started off as a programmer, COBOL programmer, and cut my teeth all the way back there on payroll, maintenance, supply, accounting processes, and working for in the first part of my career for a large mining company, which was probably allowed me two major objectives. One was to get out and see the world. As a mining company, you visited a lot of places around the world. Some of them good, some of them not so good. But yeah, really diverse business objectives, different commodities from aluminium, copper, steel, and sort of aluminium. And going forward, it also allowed me to see the use of technology for different applications, as well as working with different cultures. So that was sort of a great part of my career. And then after that, the tale of two halves, I left the mining industry and joined the finance banking industry. And so I worked for 14 years in Melbourne with a large bank there, and then moved to Canada, and where I am now in the US with another large UK bank. And so in those latter half, the banking financial, there was lots of transformation roles, lots of different sides, both agile and traditional delivery transformation, as well as people transformations as well. And so the latest role that I have is really getting to the heart of assisting the bank I'm working with to implement new ways of working, both at an individual business unit level here in the US, as well as leveraging an enterprise approach to that transformation as well. I mean, it's really early days on that, but it's interesting when you do come into an organization and look at the complete and utter differences that they have, and when they come together and say, no, we want to do things in a common way. And so that's quite encouraging, and it's been different from my other transformations where you build something big and you push it out, whereas this one's a lot of people coming together and wanting to converge over time. So lots of different lenses on that, lots of different aspects, but it's a fantastic wide role, and able to really get involved with the multitude of the businesses across this bank, and also, but still testing and playing in the local the local jurisdiction as well. So, Todd, that's in a nutshell what I've been doing. But at heart, a technologist, and firmly believe in the transformation and change approach for
Yeah.
the betterment of the companies.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And with that breadth of experience, I'm sure it's allowed you to sort of take a little bit of each thing that from different experiences and different cultures and countries into where you are now. And the reason why I asked to interview you really came from I think it was our first or second conversation. You asked me a question, and I think we both hit it off in that, these transformations are really all about the people. I mentioned, 24 years in Scrum, and you go and Scrum and now Lean and Kanban, and you look at these companies that say we tried it and we failed, but yet Scrum, Kanban, Lean, like these techniques have been around for a long time, and they really haven't changed much. It's really the people that are trying to implement them, and how much are they willing to embrace this new way of working. And I loved you mentioned, and this was the kicker for the interview here. You mentioned about tapping into the latent potential. So I'd love maybe you to share a little bit more about where you were going with that, and then maybe some story of your experience and what you've either seen or what you're seeing now with approaching change.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I think you mentioned about picking up things from some of my transformations and times in various organisations, and I think it was my first transformation where when we started this, nobody really knew what they were doing with regards to scaled agile, and this
Right.
particular company, the CEO sort of came back from an overseas trip and sort of declared to everybody and the press to say, hey, we're going down the agile path. And so really at that stage we had to pick things up and learn and really design everything. And so at that juncture, you're really sort of talking about structures. You're starting to say, well, the business wants this outcome and we've got to put in these structures. And you're thinking of it like a program or a project in a real traditional sense.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't until I started to, see the impact over time on the people and what really was happening, and looking back on my time saying, oh wow, if I had have known that right at
Mhm.
that time, then I would have used that as a lever. And I've certainly taken that learning into other transformations. And that was um, when we started sort of to go down the journey, and this was a scaled agile journey at this particular bank, and it had 13,000 people that were impacted and brought up to the new structure. And it was really a top to bottom. It was full embedded right up into business. It had business, tech, operations, even HR. And the people working in the model over a period of time, something remarkable was happening, right? What was happening was when you started to flatten that structure and you started to get people closer to customer outcomes, then yes, they started to intimately understand what the customer wanted. But then they started to obviously innovate on that. They started to understand through OKRs and shared understanding the
Yeah.
story that was being told. They could articulate the story. So, what was really happening here? What was happening was I was now, as you sort of said a little bit in your intro, I was starting to see them unlock more potential to the company. So, and what that really means was, yes, we gave them empowerment around planning. We gave them empowerment around prioritization, sizing, what work to do and what work not to do, requirements. They had all of those fundamental structures through the model, but they also had that ability to then take an item and through shared understanding and innovate on it and start to use design thinking themselves and start to drive the business. And this resulted in faster changes. It resulted in much greater employment satisfaction, right? The EVP for the employees went right up, right? They got high into the 90s with respect to their employee value and their sort of the Your View surveys that they used to run every year. And so this potential, I thought, well, hold on a second. If I go back to the business case, right, if I go back to what the company wanted, they wanted a certain percentage taken out of budgets. They wanted, yes, connectivity, faster changes, improved customer satisfaction. But this whole potential drove a much better value proposition. And it meant I could do much more with less. People were much more fungible. People were obviously thinking about changes and presenting changes back to the business, thinking ahead of changes. So I took that into my next transformation and really built upon that at the front as opposed to at the back.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about that now in the current one with the bank I'm working with now. And when you talk about that tapping in and start to talk about having multiple leaders instead of just one leader, it really resonates with people, right? It really does, touch the fact that, hold on a second, in this particular business, there's 1,400 odd people moving into the model. And while it's probably smallish in terms of the transformations I've done, talking about that particular value proposition and where it's going to get to really does resonate with a lot of people. And so I think, Todd, that for me, transformations then started to become about what can the people and what can you tap into. 2 years down the path, you've got a much stronger organization. You've got, with that nimbleness and that agile with the little a, that's really what you're trying to achieve. And so it's really opened up a lot more avenue. Now I'm probably preaching to the converted on you and all your audience here in terms of they probably knew this. But I think it's one to think about that you need to build in right from the start. And it does open up a lot more opportunity.
Now here's so I'm with you 100%, and I've seen it myself. And what I'd like to maybe hone in on is, transformation equals change equals, stay away. To a lot of people, it's an uncomfortable change. A lot of people, feel that, well, we've been doing it this other way for a long time and we've gotten results. So why do we need to change? How did you sell them on this? I mean, short of trust me, I've seen it before, right? How do you take some of those managers that, are used to assigning work to people and that's sort of the value in their job today? How did you approach those? Because I find in a lot of the transformations that I work on, it tends to be the senior executives really want it. The lower, the team, the people that are doing the development, they're cautiously, looking at what's changing and saying, okay, it seems like there's too many meetings. But then eventually they start to buy into, well, this is a more productive way of working. But it's the people in the middle that sometimes can sort of not see the full value of it, or even feel like their contribution to the company might be minimized.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point. And I mean, I've heard terms used like the frozen middle and thawing that out. And there's always got to be the what's in it for me, and the sort of win-win situation. sort of giving examples and running examples of how to grow your role, how to sort of see beyond and strategically move, and also talk frankly about the shift from, you know, I've got to be a people manager and have 150 people to, you know, I can be somebody who strategically empowers and unblocks and really drives sort of the direction of where we need to go. And while, you know, that those, you know, the squeeze between top executives and sort of the feature teams, there is a I suppose from a transformation, a very deliberate group of stakeholders that we need to manage, and so in this sense, you know, you sort of got to talk to them about being an individual contributor somehow. You've also got to talk to them about the different things that they need to bring together. You know, some models, and the one that we're employing now, are all two in the box model between product and engineering. And so there's roles to be played all the way up and down the stack, as well as, you know, when we start to think in our platform journey sense, you know, value streams and sort of our release trains, then we also need to think strategically about where we need to go and who owns certain capabilities and who owns some of the sort of the journey capabilities and the platform capabilities. So you start to change the dialogue into a more strategic dialogue, and you also start to sort of show the art of the possible for where people need to be on this journey. And you know, from my side, we deliberately, especially in the last two transformations, we brought forward the addressing of career paths, right? So sometimes people in their transformation leave that whole readdressing of career paths to last. But bringing it forward and making sure that when we run things like town halls and marketplaces, we say, hey, you can get all the way up to a distinguished engineer in this company and still be an individual contributor. We sort of showed them multiple branches to where their career path could go, as opposed to just leaving it in sort of in the ether. So we sort of made sure that we addressed it. In my first transformation, we didn't address it till right at the end. And there was a lot of uncertainty and there was a lot of, well, where do I go? What do I do?
How do I fit into
and things like that. So again, it comes back to your first point. It is about the people one way or the other, and making sure that people can see a clear path forward is an important aspect. Don't leave it to last. That's my tip on that.
Yeah. And so to that regard, when you talk about the journey and, you know, we're gonna look different, let's say in a year from now, are you communicating that at the senior level? How does it get communicated all the way down? I mean, you mentioned town halls.
I find that it obviously is communicated differently at different levels, you know. So, for example, here in the business, there was you know, 2-day offsite last week, and we were addressing the top 50 executives within that business unit, right? So that's a great opportunity to take them through the next layer, to keep the conversation going, to give them speaking notes for their teams, so on and so forth. But that is the top executive, right? And by the way, they tend to be a lot more, hey, I want to be on the change journey. And as you said, they're sort of really at the top. When you start to get down and the pyramid starts to grow and the base starts to grow, then I like to inject, we use marketplaces as a type of, hey, 3 or 4 days, we set up booths. The booths are sort of all different things, right? So one might be based on roles, one might be based on events, one might be based on, you know, organizational structures. And so we allow people, and we have a lot of a day in the life of, a scrum master, a day in the life of a
Wow.
product owner, a day in the life of an engineer, a day in the life of an analyst, right? And so people can see themselves, and then we wear the bright t-shirts, they come up and they ask us questions, right? And they just keep asking all day long. And so these are types of mechanisms to get the message and communication out to different levels, and also obviously different populations, right? Because and obviously you've got, typically with a company, you've got lots of locations. So I'd be doing marketplaces. I remember one company I was doing in Singapore, India,
Wow.
different places. Back in Australia, we're doing them obviously in the US. And so you run your marketplaces and make sure that everybody can touch and feel and see themselves in the model.
That's really interesting. So these aren't, so when you say marketplace, it's not showing off. You're not like, I've seen these where you show off technology,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You're showing off, like you'll have someone there to say, okay, let me tell you what a Scrum Master does. Is that more the approach?
It is, but also having examples of demo. I think we use the term marketplace more in the term of people coming together in a marketplace and meeting friends and neighbours and having a discussion, as opposed to, oh, hold on a second, this is where a whole heap of suppliers are coming and trying to sell you a database or the next. Right. So,
I see. So they would go up to the booth that talks about, a day in the life of a Scrum Master, and there would be a Scrum Master there that would sort of walk them through what it is, answer any questions. And this was used to help people that maybe want to become a Scrum Master, or was it used for that and to sort of explain where the organization is going?
I think it was for those 2 points, and also for, well, what's the next iteration? Because now in our company, especially the one I'm working in now, there's a lot of grassroots agile, right? There's plenty of feature teams out there, but what's going to be different? You're now saying we're doing scaled agile, and well, what's going to be different when I come to work? And so there's also explaining sort of the next evolution. Where have we raised the bar? Where are we moving to? What are we going to be more disciplined about with our events? And so for some people, it's, oh well, I know it, but what's going to be different, right? Things like that. So there is that opportunity to do all those three things.
Right. Because I've often seen that, it's a great way. And how effective, like, because when you talk about these marketplace versus, I guess, a traditional communication method, right? Some email comes out, or you send them off to a class or watch this video. I'm guessing these are much more effective, high touch opportunities.
They are. I mean, they're exhausting, from morning to night. And you typically do them about 2 or 3 days in any location to pump through as many people. But they're very effective, right? They get a lot of good feedback, and also people appreciate the fact that they can ask questions, and sometimes. I've seen that when people are in groups, like they typically come down in their teams, like in 4x4. And so they get a little bit more courage to sort of ask the question. And when they hear somebody else asking a question, they can sort of sit and listen. You can tell they're interested in it, and then they sort of get the same answer at the same time.
Yeah. Because I found a lot, you mentioned earlier OKRs, and I found that, companies that are just, we're just building something, but they don't know the larger purpose of this, right? Like when I finish building it, then what? What does it do? When you explain to them the OKR and how this thing that you're building ties to this bigger strategy, that's really where I've seen a lot of change, and I'm sure you've
Well,
seen
I
that
think
as well.
OKRs is one of those important foundational element of a transformation. Um, you hear about story mapping, and story mapping is all about shared understanding, right? So think of OKRs as being part of that story mapping, but it's giving you strategic intent. So, in other words, if you've got top of the house, you've got your plan, your strategic plan, and then that starts to come down, and you want to make sure that there's alignment there. So you add color to your story mapping through strategic intent and getting shared understanding and telling the stories
Yeah.
that you need to do at the start of PI planning and even sprints and other things. Then you've got that context. So you can make a decision that you need to make because remember I said at the start, we empower feature teams and squads with things like planning, prioritization, sizing. They make the call, right? But how do they make the call? They make the call because they've now got shared understanding, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the old example? If I give you a BRD and I got the same BRD, we both read it and then we draw the picture, right?
Definitely.
So we want to eliminate that. And I think that's one of the strengths of Agile.
Yeah.
Is actually if you can impart shared understanding to your teams, then you really are making sure that you're following through with all of that. And OKRs is a fundamental plank in that foundation.
Yeah, and I know too. We talked about that turn the ship around, right, video where he talks about giving them intent, and they're
Yes.
going to make better decisions than maybe you would even have because they know we have to go that way, or we know we have to go live by a certain date, or solve some certain complex problem, and then let the team sort of figure it out. But what I've seen in organizations is they ebb and flow between letting the team have that autonomy and then some managers wanting to have that control.
Yeah.
And how have I have a recent team where I noticed we were doing sprint planning and the Scrum Master started to put start and end dates on the stories. And I said, well, where's that coming from? And he's like, oh, well, I was asked to put the dates. And I'm like, but aren't the dates just the start and the end of the sprint?
Mm.
And so I got to the bottom of it is that they're trying to see like when work is late, how late is it? And I think they're looking at the wrong thing, right? Because you're sort of by telling the team to give you dates, you're also telling them like a little bit of I don't trust you, right? And I'm going to empower you, but only to a point.
That's right.
Right. And so how have you seen things like that? And how have you resolved things like that?
I mean, obviously, you see examples like that all the time, and especially at the start of transformations. And those are the things that you try and coach your teams and coach through it. Also, I think one of the and this comes back to your setup, right?
Yeah.
I think people who are able to come in and say, do this, do this, do this, are probably, you haven't set up your model properly, right? You've probably got an extra role in your model that should have been eliminated, right? And so it's also one there. I mean, in this company I'm doing now, this transformation, the way that they've eased into the transformation is they've set up some early adopter tribes, right? And the first time this group of people came together for PI planning, in walked the current line managers who were really outside the early adopter tribes, and they sat at the top of the table and they started directing, no, you're going to work on this. And it was like a complete anti pattern to what it was that we wanted the squad to be responsible for and work on it, right? But that in itself was a learning for what we called the early adopter tribes. And so it was good to see it.
Yeah.
so that we could then design it out. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a combination of, if you're getting some autocratic type behavior through your current structure, maybe it's your product managers or whatever, then you can coach that out. If you have excess roles,
Yeah.
look at them and see if you can eliminate them and move them on. So, I mean, there's a few ways there, but the data will show you, right?
Yeah.
The data will show you how they're performing and what they're doing.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I see here that the clock is flashing that we have 9 minutes left. But what I've seen absolutely is, we define these roles of what the agile teams are doing, and then sometimes some of the managers are looking at it like, well, wait a second, you just took something away from me. And I've also seen sometimes where when you go in and you give some advice, people often take it negatively because they've been running things for a long time that way, and to them things have been going really well. And
Yeah.
and you're right, is addressing their concerns early and upfront is absolutely critical to the success of these transformations. But I've also seen that these human side of things, they continue on. I mean, no matter where you are, and you're constantly addressing them. I think that marketplace idea is great. I haven't heard that before. I've only heard it, showing off the technology, but that's a great idea. And even having, some of those open, like town hall type sessions, where they can, the feature teams and people can hear from leadership that, this is where we're heading and this is the benefit of working this way. I think goes a long, long way. So this is great. I don't know if you want to, any last words of, if you on your next transformation, what have you learned, and what would you do next?
Look, I think just, from where we started this discussion, I think that the people who are in the transformation make up the bulk of the transformation. And so they're really your greatest asset. And they're the ones that you need to focus on. And they're going to give you your biggest rate of return, period, right, in a transformation. And so I think, as I said, try not to leave some of those fundamental people aspects to the end, and try to make sure that they're balanced in your backlog when you're doing the transformation. I think they're the pointers. But I mean, every time you do one, you learn more, right? And the people who make a difference in the transformation are the ones who really are passionate about it and bring it back in. So I'm always learning, and I've already got ideas on how I would do another transformation after this one better. So,
Yeah.
so Todd, it's been great talking to you about it.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.